If the student doesn't read at all, if the student doesn't know the alphabet, if the student can't match up the sound of a letter with the letter that he sees on the printed page, so that you couldn't even take a word like man, M-A-N, and expect the student to be able to read it and match up the sounds. I think of it as a very introductory level. And I think that most of our students are beyond that point because they weren't born yesterday. They've been in this country for at least a little while. And people, very often you'll find that your students will have picked things up. Some of the things they've picked up are going to be wrong, but they're going to speak some English to start with. Sometimes it's a matter of correcting bad habits. One of the things, when you have children in school and you're a third grade teacher, you pretty much know what you should be teaching in the third grade level because you know what the curriculum was in second grade and you know what it was in first grade. So you know what they're already supposed to know and you can set out the next step, the next level to take them to. With our students, it's very different because they pick things up hit or miss. They may have jobs, they may have doctor's appointments, they pick things up, they may live in a neighborhood where they speak to neighbors, you never know. And they pick some things up, but not others. So if you hit one area of English, you'll say, oh, this person knows quite a bit. And then all of a sudden, it falls off. There's these big gaps in what they know and what they don't know. So it's a little more a challenge to try to figure out where to work with them. Now the side-by-side series consists of 4 books. Book 1 is this blue book, and it has a light blue book to go with it, and this is the workbook. So if I were working, and I think many of your students will start here, you teach in this book, and then if you want to give assignments, you give assignments in the workbook for the student to do. What we usually say is, you can check this book out, you can use it to teach from, you can work with a student with this book, but nobody's writing in the book. This is a workbook. It's intended for the student to write in it. So this book ought to be purchased because it can't be sent back to our library and used again by somebody else. The book costs, I don't know, somewhere around $20 or $25. You can find out exactly what the price is at this moment. 17. Good. Okay. You probably will find that many of your students can't afford a $17 book. They're not living on the street. They may have a television set. They may have a car. They've got a little bit of money. They can purchase this book and write in it. If you feel you're not going to do very much with it, you could always make Xerox copies of a few pages and try it out to see how it works with them before you ask them to commit to buy. If you have a student that's truly too poor to pay for this book, the organization will probably cover it for you, but most of our students do have some resources. There's 4 sets of these books. Book 2 comes in red, Book 3 comes in green, and Book 4 comes in orange. So and each of them has a workbook to go with them. So when you open this book, you will see that there's more color. It's kind of more varied than the Laubach series. It's a more interesting book to look at. It's also going to assume some awareness of the English alphabet and English words. So what I'd like to do with you this morning is look at Book 1. There are at least 2 of this blue book, I think, on each table. So you may find you sharing with other people. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to take this book and turn to page 18. Typical layout for how they teach something. It's taught very much by drill and response, drill and response. And it takes that to learn English grammar to start. At the top, in the 2 light blue boxes, are an example of the pattern that is being used on this page. So you can read through this with the student. It has a question and an answer. And then you can go down to the pictures of the people who are talking, down below at the bottom of page 18, and you can read through the various little conversations, one question, one answer. And then on page 19, the student starts filling in how to ask the question, how to answer the question themselves. So I'd like to start on page 18. Now notice this is chapter 3. This is not the first chapter in the book. But look at what's on that page. And perhaps you could come up with some suggestions for what do you think this page is trying to teach grammatically? What do you think are the things that are being practiced and repeated on this page? Yeah.
Contractions.
Okay, contractions. I am, I'm. We have to learn these. Okay, something else. Yes.
Present continuous tense.
Okay, present continuous. Would you explain to everybody what that means?
Yeah, so generally when we think of present tense, if we study another language, it's kind of a person acting in the present to do something, but it can be used very generically, whereas the present continuous is something that has to be happening at that moment and is continuing.
Yeah, when we talk present continuous, it's I am eating, he is eating. And it means right now. And that's the first tense that is being taught. Now, does the student need to know the term present continuous? No, not necessarily. Do you need to know the term present continuous? No. It might help if you're talking in this room. It's also called present progressive, incidentally. If you look back on page 17, which is the beginning of chapter 3, you see how it says present continuous? That's the subject of this particular chapter. Now, suppose you know you're not an English teacher, and it's been a long time since you studied English in school, and you don't know what present continuous means. Well, it's pretty simple to find out. Just go Google it. You'll find out immediately online, and then you'll say, oh yes, that's exactly what's here. So I see that's what they're trying to work on right now, is present continuous. So there are several things that are being taught. Now, what about the vocabulary? Watching TV, reading, cooking. Take a look again back at page 17. Here's the new vocabulary for this chapter, and there are all those activities that are going to be matched with I am, you are, he is. If the student doesn't know these, here are pictures that go with them. You can go through them. You can cover up the words after that and go back through the pictures and see if the student can learn. That can be an assignment to learn. And then starting on page 18, they're going to be seeing these words in sentences. The energy in here is fantastic today, and I'm told it was last week too. This is a great group of people, but we still want to move on. Okay? Do you have a comment or a question?
On page 20, we are assuming that they can read these words?
Yes, yes. If they can't read these words, then you're at the wrong level, and maybe you should be back in Laubach, or of course you will have been through chapter 1 and chapter 2, so you can figure out where you have to go back to. One of the things that's going to happen when you get together with your student is you're not going to have any idea where the student's at to start. And so there's going to be a bit of groping. The first 2 or 3 lessons, you're going to be trying something. You're going to be figuring out, is it too easy? Is it too hard? Do I have to go backwards? Do I have to go forwards? You have to be at a level where you're not going over the student's head all the time. So you can start, for example, you'll have assessments. You can try. You can start in chapter 1 and side by side just to dabble in it, just to see how is this student in relation to this. Is this a good level for me to start at? Or should I be going back to Laubach because there's something they can't read the words, they can't put sounds to the letters?
So I have a question. So if, like the person I'm working with now, like started at absolute zero. So like at but she wants to learn how to read and write English as well as speak it. And so at what point would you recommend going from conversational to starting to teach them how to read and write?
Well, partly, you're going to be assessing what's most important to this person. Do they need to read and write? Because conversation comes up all the time, and it's the hardest part, isn't it? If you've ever studied a foreign language, you get to where you can read what's on the printed page, but if somebody asks you a question or says something, you can't hear the words, and you can't figure out what words to put in a sentence to say back. So I think it's going to depend on your student. I don't know that I have a great lot of wisdom about at what point you start teaching them to read and write, but they're going to need some reading to do these exercises. And in order to cement how to say something, they're going to have to be able to do exercises. So you may, if they can't, take these words and learn them. And many of the students can, but if they can't, then I would probably drop back to the Laubach series and work on the letters for a while first, because at some point they're going to have to be able to do the drills. That's the best answer I have. Anybody else? Chris?
So that's really how Laubach starts, right? And in that first book, it starts solely with conversational and then moves to reading and then moves to writing. So that would probably be a good place to start. And in that introductory level, the first chapter of Laubach, we looked at it, that manuscript writing, right? So that they can practice actually doing the writing, and that workbook gives them space to do it. So Laubach really is for starting conversational, moving to reading and writing.
Yes.
Do you have previous knowledge of what you think is the level of language of our?
We have very limited information. We're an all-volunteer organization. We don't have a staff. You've probably heard about Project Second Chance, the library. They take people who already speak English and teach them to read and write, and they have a staff. They have a full library. They bring in the student and interview the student and have pretty good idea where that student's at. We haven't done all that. What has happened has been that student has somehow left a message on our phone number that they want a tutor. And I've called the student, and I've tried to get basic information to fill out a student form, which is name, address, approximate age, the country you came from, and most key, what hours and days are you available to be tutored, because we have to match you. On that 5 to 10 minute conversation, I've said, this student is really limited, meaning that I finally managed to get the information over the phone, but it was hard. Or fair, which is, I was actually able to communicate with the student. The student understood what I was asking, it worked well. Or none, really, this student was not able to communicate with me. A relative called, and I got the information from a relative. Sometimes it's the child. The parent is the one who needs the tutor. The child already speaks English and can give me the information I need to fill out the form, and I've written on the form, call daughter a niece and make the appointment that way, because that first appointment you have to make over the phone, right? So that may be none. Or maybe someone has called and they have a friend they want to put on the list. I've never even talked to the person. I'm assuming none, because they had to have somebody else call for them. That's how basic it is. You're going to be doing the research from that point on. You're going to be finding out. And you'll be getting your student today, and I'll just say this right now. If anything about that student isn't what you think you want, or if something doesn't work when you make that initial phone call, let me know. We'll make changes. We'll get in touch with the student for you if we need to do that. If that's not the right student for you, we'll make the change. We want you to be happy because we want you to stay with us. So think about that when this all comes up. But the answer is we know very little. We're putting a lot of this on you and asking you to do the research and find out what the situation is.
What percentage of the students are at that very introductory level?
It's fairly small. I've never done percentages, and the waiting list is changing all the time. I guess I could. That hasn't been a priority of mine. The number of students that actually say none is a very small percentage, very small.
So that's